Jared Carter's hands trembled slightly as he fastened his cufflinks that morning, his mind already focused on the speech he would deliver at the University of Mississippi. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip and inspiring lecture on criminal justice reform, something he dedicated years of his life to. As the deputy director of the National Justice Coalition, Jared had seen the worst of the system's failings and fought tirelessly to right the wrongs. Ironically, his crusade for justice would soon turn into a living nightmare. The air was thick with the humid weight of a southern summer as Jared left the small barbecue joint on 5th Street. The owners had recognized him from a televised panel months back. They were an older black couple, kind and wise, who spoke with him passionately about the need for change. It was a conversation Jared had grown accustomed to voicing empathy, promising that reform was not just a dream but a fight worth pursuing. Yet, the exhaustion in their voices left a bitter taste in his mouth, as if they'd long since stopped believing the words of men like him. As Jared crossed the street towards his rental car, the sound of screeching tires shattered the sticky calm of the evening. Flashing red and blue lights lit up the darkness, their glow washing over him like the cold touch of inevitability. "Hands where I can see them," barked a young cop, his voice sharp, eyes wide with suspicion and something darker, something Jared knew all too well. Before he could fully process what was happening, 2 officers stormed from the car, guns drawn, rage in their eyes. "Sir, what's the problem?" Jared kept his voice steady, his hands raised. Years of teaching students how to handle these situations guided his every move. But nothing could prepare him for what came next. "Turn around, hands on the car." The order came from a 3rd officer, older, heavier, his voice soaked with authority and disdain. His name tag read Sergeant Brooks, and his smug expression made Jared's stomach clench with a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Jared complied, his hands pressed against the cool metal of his rental car, every muscle in his body tight with disbelief. This couldn't be happening not to him. He'd read countless reports, fought for justice on behalf of those falsely accused. But the feeling of handcuffs biting into his wrists, the sound of his rights being recited with mechanical indifference, it made his mind spin. "What's this?" One of the younger officers sneered, pulling a small plastic bag from Jared's jacket pocket. White powder. His fingers trembled just holding it, like he was holding proof of Jared's guilt itself. "That's not mine." Jared's voice was firm, but his throat tightened with a panic he struggled to contain. "You know, that's not mine." "Yeah, sure." The officer laughed, exchanging a glance with his partner, Officer Miller, whose own expression mirrored the same cruel amusement. Another guilty man with the same tired line. Sergeant Brooks chuckled darkly. "You guys make it too easy." His words were a blade, slicing through the fragile hope Jared tried to cling to. The street had grown quiet, but not empty. People had gathered at a distance, their faces curious and concerned. A woman held up her phone, trying to film, but Sergeant Brooks shut her down with a pointed glare. "Back up, lady. Unless you want to end up in cuffs, too." Jared stared at the cracked pavement beneath him, his mind screaming at him to fight back, to argue, to demand justice. But he knew the script. The truth didn't matter here. His truth didn't matter. They thought they'd won. But Jared Carter wasn't just another helpless man at their mercy. Not by a long shot. The buzzing fluorescence of the holding cell was a sickly reminder that Jared Carter was now just another nameless man swallowed by the system he'd spent his career trying to fix. His wrists ached from the cold, unyielding metal of the handcuffs, but his anger was sharper, slicing through the dull throb of his pulse. Hours drifted by, each minute stretching longer than the last. Jared had always known the deck was stacked against men like him, black men who dared to walk the line between progress and the establishment's control. But knowing it and living it were 2 very different beasts. The dingy precinct room stank of sweat and old coffee. His public defender finally shuffled in, a wiry man in his late 20s with a crumpled suit and tired eyes. Brian Leckler, they called him. Fresh out of law school by the look of him, or just beaten down by years of losing. He spoke fast, words tumbling out like he was trying to spit them out before they choked him. "Listen, Mr. Carter," Brian whispered, his eyes darting nervously toward the officers lounging by the door. "Judge Hendricks is handling your case. And between you and me, he's not exactly known for his mercy. So, what's the offer?" Jared's voice was cold, measured. 5 years, maybe 3 if you plead out, keep your head down. Brian's words came out like a half-hearted apology. "But if you try to fight this, you're looking at 20. Jared glanced toward the station's exit, his eyes narrowing. Sergeant Brooks and Officer Miller were chatting casually with another officer, their smugness practically glowing off their faces. They weren't worried. They weren't even trying to hide it. His jaw tightened. They thought he was cornered, just another name on their victory list. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Jared leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Brian's. "We're going to trial." Brian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The doubt was clear in his eyes, but Jared wasn't looking for his approval. He was looking for the truth. And if they wanted a fight, he was more than ready to give them one. The courtroom was a circus, but only Jared seemed to notice. Reporters lined the back walls, their eager faces lit with anticipation. Law students hunched over notebooks, eyes wide and hungry for drama. To them, this was just another spectacle, a routine drama of crime and punishment, a farce they would dissect over coffee and textbooks later. Judge Hendricks strolled in with all the enthusiasm of a man forced to attend his own funeral. He was a hefty figure in his late 60s, his sharp features dulled by decades of handing down convictions like candies on Halloween. His reputation was ironclad swift judgments, heavy sentences, and the system adored him for it. "Let's get this over with," the judge muttered, slumping into his high-backed chair. His gavel hit the sound block like an afterthought. Jared's public defender, Brian, looked like he'd aged 10 years since the night before. His hand shook slightly as he rifled through a folder filled with creased papers and scribbled notes. Jared could practically feel the man's fear radiating off him. At the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney Logan Price prepared his performance, straightening his tie with the precision of a man about to deliver a flawless monologue. Price was young, arrogant, and dangerous hungry for another win to feed his ambitions. And today, Jared was his prey. "Your Honor," Price began, his voice dripping with artificial charm, "the state is prepared to present overwhelming evidence against the defendant, Mr. Carter. Evidence gathered by 3 of our finest officers who risk their lives daily to keep our streets safe." The 3 officers sat nearby, their expressions relaxed and amused. Sergeant Brooks even winked at Jared, a smirk curving his lips like a knife's edge. The jury had already made up their minds. Jared could see it in their disinterested stares, the way they nodded along to Price's every word. But Jared wasn't here to plead for their mercy. His fingers rested on the surface of the table, calm, steady. He wasn't fighting for his innocence. He was fighting for justice. And when he won, the whole world would know. Brian's voice trembled as he tried to cross-examine the officers. The young lawyer's nerves were a mess, his words spilling out like a broken faucet. His questions were weak, lacking the force to puncture the seamless lies built by the 3 officers. Jared watched from the defense table, his expression calm, eyes cold and calculating. "Sergeant Brooks," Brian stammered, his fingers gripping his pen like a lifeline, "you claim my client was acting suspiciously, but did he try to run?" Brooks leaned back in his seat, a confident smile spreading across his thick face. "No, but he sure looked like he was thinking about it." His tone was laced with mockery, earning a couple of snickers from the jury. "Did he resist arrest?" Brian continued, his voice fading. Not physically, Brooks admitted, folding his arms across his chest. But he sure had a lot of questions. Seemed like he was trying to stall. You know, the usual stuff. Guilty men always tried to talk their way out. Jared's gaze never left the officers, especially Brooks. The man's arrogance was almost impressive, his words delivered with the rehearsed precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. And where exactly were the drugs found? Brian asked, his tone flat, defeated. In his jacket pocket, Officer Miller chimed in, his eyes alight with confidence. Right where he hid them. The drugs tested positive for cocaine. Another murmur rippled through the gallery. Jared could feel their judgment like a weight on his chest, pressing down with every exaggerated lie. Thank you, officers, Brian mumbled, retreating to his chair with the grace of a man who had already surrendered. Jared's lips curled into a faint smile. They thought the trial was just a formality. They thought he was helpless. But Jared Carter wasn't a man who folded under pressure. He was a man who thrived in it. The air in the courtroom grew thick as Judge Hendricks sighed, clearly impatient. He glanced at his watch like he had somewhere better to be, probably planning to wrap this up and hit the golf course by noon. Jared remained seated, unbothered, his mind as sharp as a blade. Logan Price, the assistant district attorney, strutted up to the jury, confidence dripping off him like cologne. Ladies and gentlemen, he began with a practiced charm, you've seen the evidence. You've heard from 3 highly decorated officers. This isn't a complicated case. Drugs don't just jump into people's pockets. He shot a pointed glance at Jared, smirking. The law doesn't bend for feelings, it's built on facts. And the facts are clear. The jury nodded along, a few exchanging skeptical glances Jared's way. Price walked back to his table like a victor on a battlefield, practically glowing with the certainty of a win. Brian stumbled to his feet, tugging at his tie, clearly wrestling with his own doubts. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he stammered, I just ask that you remember reasonable doubt. That's all. He swallowed hard and sat down, defeated. Judge Hendricks barely hid his irritation. The jury will now deliberate. But just as he was about to dismiss them, Jared rose to his feet, calm and deliberate, cutting through the tension like a knife. Your Honor, Jared said, his voice resonating through the room. The judge glared at him, already annoyed. Mr. Carter, your attorney already spoke. Sit down. Jared didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, slowly pulling out a leather ID case and flipping it open. A shiny golden badge caught the sunlight filtering through the tall window's bold letters, FBI. The courtroom froze, collective gasps ringing out. I am Jared Carter, Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he declared, his tone unwavering. And I have enough evidence to expose every corrupt cop and official involved in this setup. Judge Hendricks' mouth fell open, and Logan Price paled like a ghost, stumbling backward. The officers at the prosecution table sat stiff as boards, their faces drained of all color. The spectators leaned forward, stunned and buzzing with whispered speculation. Jared's gaze locked on Sergeant Brooks, who now looked like a caged animal, panicked and twitchy. This trial isn't about me. It's about a systemic abuse of power, a ring of corruption that ends here. The room was silent except for the soft whirring of reporters' cameras, capturing every angle of the officers' stunned faces. Jared's smile was faint but deadly, his eyes fixed on the men who thought they had him beat. They had no idea just how far they'd underestimated him. The courtroom was a boiling pot ready to explode. Jared could feel the charged energy buzzing around him as if the very air had turned electric. His badge gleamed on the defense table, and all eyes were locked on him, waiting for his next move. The panic in the officer's eyes was deliciously satisfying. You're bluffing, Sergeant Brooks spat, his voice thick with desperation. His usual arrogance was nowhere to be found. It was almost pitiful. Almost. Jared arched an eyebrow, his calm expression never faltering. "I'm many things, Sergeant, but a liar isn't one of them." He reached into his briefcase and retrieved a slim black recorder, holding it up for everyone to see. "What's that?" Logan Price asked, his voice cracking with the uncertainty of a man whose confidence had been yanked out from under him. Jared's finger hovered over the play button, eyes glinting with an intensity that made everyone in the room hold their breath. "This, gentleman, is a little insurance policy I brought along. You didn't really think I'd walk into your trap without a plan, did you?" He pressed the button. A low beep. Then the voices spilled out, crystal clear, like poisonous honey. "You know, it's funny. All you boys got the same story. I didn't do it. I was just minding my business. Same tired lines. We could recite them in our sleep." Sergeant Brooks's voice. Smug, mocking, so sure of his power. The recording continued, laying out every ugly word, every casual admission of guilt. The courtroom murmured in disbelief, reporters scrambling to catch every second of the damning audio. Cameras clicked, pens scratched against notepads. The jury exchanged looks of horror and confusion. "You still think I'm bluffing, Brooks?" Jared's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Because I've got hours of this. Conversations, videos, documents. Everything I need to burn your little empire to the ground." Brooks looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His hands trembled, knuckles white as he gripped the table. Officer Miller and Officer Denton exchanged panicked glances, their expressions slipping from shock to pure terror. The crowd stirred, whispers growing louder like a gathering storm. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Jared felt the scales tipping back in his favor. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been crushed under the weight of the system's corruption, and he was winning. The courtroom had gone from tense to outright chaos. Reporters were half standing from their seats, cameras clicking furiously. The jury members exchanged looks of disbelief and outrage, their eyes darting between Jared and the corrupt officers like they were witnessing a live scandal unfold. Judge Hendricks pounded his gavel with the desperation of a man trying to contain an earthquake. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." He roared, but his voice only added to the frenzy. His own eyes were wide, the mask of authority slipping from his face. Logan Price shot to his feet, his voice cracking. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense has no right to." "No right?" Jared interrupted, his calm voice slicing through the clamor like a blade. "You mean I have no right to defend myself against a conspiracy designed to bury me alive?" "Mr. Carter, sit down." Judge Hendricks snapped, his gavel slamming down like thunder, but Jared didn't flinch. If anything, his confidence only grew. "You see, Your Honor," Jared continued, his tone cold and precise, "this isn't just about me. This is about every person who's been manipulated, framed, and discarded by a corrupt system you've helped protect." The judge's face flushed an angry red. "You are out of line." "Am I?" Jared's eyes never left him. "Or is it the system that's out of line? Because from where I'm standing, corruption has been running unchecked in this city for far too long. And today it all comes crashing down." He nodded toward the back of the room. 3 men in dark suits entered quietly, their expressions unreadable but their purpose unmistakable. Federal agents, ready to dismantle the nightmare Jared had been caught in. "Gentlemen," Jared said, gesturing toward the table where the 3 officers now looked like cornered animals. "You know what to do." Sergeant Brooks leaped to his feet, his face twisted with panic. "You can't do this. This is entrapment." "No, Sergeant," Jared replied, his voice a cool whisper. "What you did was entrapment. This is justice." One of the agents stepped forward, cuffs in hand. "Sergeant David Brooks, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, perjury, and falsification of evidence." The courtroom erupted. Reporters swarmed forward, their phones and cameras flashing, voices overlapping in frantic excitement. The jury stared in shock, their expressions a mix of relief and horror. Jared glanced over at Logan Price, who now looked like a deer caught in the headlights. His perfect case had just crumbled into dust. And Jared wasn't done yet. The handcuffs clicked around Sergeant Brooks's wrists, his face drained of all its usual arrogance. Officer Miller and Officer Denton weren't far behind, their shoulders slumped, eyes downcast, as if acknowledging the end of a long toxic reign. The federal agents moved with methodical precision, their presence a declaration that the system's darkest corners would no longer remain hidden. But for Jared Carter, this moment was about more than just bringing down a few dirty cops. It was about exposing a system built on manipulation and cruelty, and the painful truth that power abused is power wasted. As he stood in that chaotic courtroom, his gaze swept over the spectators, the reporters, the students who had come to witness justice at work. "Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty," Jared said, his voice steady, carrying a gravity that made even the judge's gavel seem small. "It's about protecting the innocent. It's about standing up when everyone else tells you to sit down. It's about speaking the truth, even when the world is screaming lies." The reporters were scribbling down his words, phones pointed at him like spotlights. Jared knew that the story they'd write tomorrow would shape more than just public opinion. It could inspire others to fight back, to question the system instead of blindly trusting it. He turned toward the jury, their eyes wide, their earlier certainty replaced with a reluctant understanding. "You were all ready to convict me, because that's how the game is rigged. But justice isn't supposed to be a game. It's supposed to be the truth." Jared glanced back at Logan Price, who now looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. The prosecutor's arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by a terror he couldn't hide. A man who built his career on easy convictions now faced the uncomfortable truth. He had been a willing cog in a broken machine. Judge Hendricks, pale and speechless, seemed paralyzed. The entire courtroom was a mirror, reflecting the ugliness of a corrupted system. And Jared's voice was the hammer shattering the glass. "Justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the people," Jared continued, his words a challenge and a promise. "And it's about time we all started acting like it." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down like a force of nature. Jared had come to expose a conspiracy against him. Instead, he had revealed something much bigger, a truth the whole world needed to hear. Jared Carter stood tall amidst the chaos, his eyes steady as the courtroom spun around him. The officers were led away, their protests lost beneath the roar of camera shutters and frantic whispers. Judge Hendricks looked more like a cornered animal than the arbiter of justice he pretended to be. And Logan Price? The prosecutor's shoulders slumped, his polished facade crumbling under the weight of truth. But Jared didn't feel victorious. Not entirely. Because justice shouldn't have required him to risk everything just to be heard. It shouldn't have taken deception and manipulation to force the truth into the light. That was the real tragedy of it all. He cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. What happened here today isn't just about me. It's about a broken system, one that punishes the poor and powerless while protecting those who abuse their authority. His words were strong, but his gaze was even stronger, pinning the audience in place. If we allow corruption to go unchecked, if we keep letting those in power decide what justice looks like, then we've already lost. The reporters' cameras and phones remained locked on him, but Jared wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking to the people who would hear his words, those who had been silenced, mistreated, or forgotten. Those who needed to know they weren't alone. You don't change the world by playing by the rules set by those who benefit from your suffering. Jared continued, his voice fierce and unyielding. You change the world by challenging the rules, by demanding better, by refusing to accept the lies you've been told. He glanced at the jurors, their faces twisted with guilt and understanding. He hoped they would remember this moment, not just for the spectacle it had become, but for the lesson it carried. Justice is a choice, Jared finished, his tone unwavering. A choice we make every single day. And today, I chose to fight back. He picked up his badge from the defense table, slipping it into his jacket pocket like a quiet declaration of victory. And as he walked out of the courtroom, the world still buzzing with his words, Jared knew his fight was far from over. But for the first time, he was ready to face it.